What's going on, everybody out there in the universe? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the podcast for the universe. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Thank you so much, everybody, for your support. It's the Energy is Love podcast. You know it because you are, in fact, listening to it, obviously. Go find all of our episodes at energyislovepodcast.com. Go follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Go subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go rate and review us on iTunes. If you are tuning into this podcast, it is your goal, your challenge, I suppose, to share it with somebody. Tell your friends, tell your family members, tell somebody about this podcast, not just so that you can help it grow and expand, but so that you can bring awareness to some of these different things that we talk about on the show with new people. In the end, that's the inspiration behind the podcast, and that's what we like to do, is simply spark your interest in your mind and give you something to think about throughout your day when you listen. So share the show. Remember, go find all of our information online at energyislovepodcast.com. And if you want to contact us for any reason at all, maybe you're interested in being a guest, you have a question you'd like to hear answered on the podcast, click on the contact link and shoot us an email. This episode is brought to you by As Above, So Below. They are a wonderful, great, little, awesome metaphysical shop located in Roy, Utah. You can find more information for As Above, So Below through our website. If you click on the Sponsors tab, you'll see As Above, So Below, which will then take you to their Facebook page. When you go check them out on Facebook and subscribe to their page, you'll keep up to date on all of their events that they host and hold at the shop. Coming up on November 3rd, they will have an herbal magic class. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn all about the variety of different herbs and plants used out there for spiritual medicine practices. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, go check them out. Go show up. Go say hello. Pop in and say you heard about As Above, So Below on the podcast. Show them some love on Facebook. And then when you need some incense, some crystals, some jewelry, some tarot cards, no matter what, they have it for you at As Above, So Below. So go check them out. As always, we're brought to you by Crystal Water Float Spa. Crystal Water is located in Twilla, Utah. If you don't know where Twilla, Utah is, just simply Google it. If you live in the area, come hop in a tank. When you float at Crystal Water, you float in the Dream Pod. We talked about Dream Pods on the show before. And Crystal Water is the nation's only distributor for the Dream Pod. So when you are ready to open up your float center, you are ready to bring floating to your friends, your family, your community, then contact Crystal Water Float and get your Dream Pod shipped out to you. You can find out more through their website, crystalwaterfloat.com, or if you're learning more about floating and the Dream Pod, go to dream-pod.com. On today's episode, I had the wonderful opportunity. I always say it's a wonderful opportunity simply because it is. But on today's episode, I got a chat with Michael Ingleby again. If you're a longtime listener and a fan of the podcast, you remember Michael was on a very early episode of the show, and I absolutely loved that episode. Michael was super cool to chat with. So he's our first repeat guest. Now Michael's been on the show twice, which is super awesome. And he came back and we just spent the entire episode bullshitting and talking and chatting about some wonderful, wonderful things, not just in relation to the metaphysical and spirituality, which Michael's incredibly well versed. This is a very entertaining, enlightening, educational episode. Towards the end, we even discussed that wonderful Netflix series, Stranger Things. So sit back, folks, and relax. Tune in and enjoy this wonderful episode with Michael Ingleby. Here we go.
You're listening to the Energy is Love podcast.
Energy is love.
The Energy is the Love podcast.
The Energy is Love podcast.
Energy is love.
The Energy is Love podcast.
The podcast for the universe.
The Energy is Love podcast.
So, Michael, what's going on, man?
Well, since I spoke with you last, kind of just the same old stuff, really. Just day in and day out, doing the work.
You are our first guest on the podcast that's got a repeat episode.
Oh, okay. Well, I feel honored. Thanks for having me back. I enjoyed the last time was really, it was a good experience. It was nice to be able to sit and talk and get to know you a little better and talk about, the work that we do, with the spiritual community here in Utah. And it's nice to be back. And I don't know, in terms of anything new going on with me, like I said, I'm still just kind of doing what I was doing before. This time of year gets a little busier, I find.
Why do you think it is? Why do you think it picks up a little
Well,
bit?
I got to tell you, I think the big thing is Halloween coming up. There are a lot of people, particularly if they're not exposed to, the spiritual community, the New Age community, whatever you want to call it, if that's not really kind of a big part of their life, but, they maintain just a level of interest. This time of year, I think even on an unconscious level, everybody kind of gets this feeling that, the veil gets thinner. Halloween's coming up. Halloween's associated with the supernatural. Supernatural immediately moves over to the realm of psychics and intuitives and, mediums who are working to put people into connection with things on the other side.
Yeah, so it's a good time of year.
This time of year gets a little busy. Yeah, busy, but also a little crazy because you also get some of those people who are good people. They're at that place on their journey where they're curious, but they also have some pretty widely held misconceptions of what this really is. I would say blame Hollywood. What
do you think's the biggest one? Like the biggest misconception around all of this stuff?
I think that the biggest thing, at least the one that I hear most often, is that we are all in a position to put you into connection with, all your departed loved ones, or, that there are just always ghosts and entities and discarnates, whatever you want to call them, that are just kind of hovering around all the time, just waiting to communicate or waiting to cause us trouble. I'll notice I get a lot of those calls this year as well too. I've got a lot of people reporting supernatural activity, hauntings and things, and I'm not trying to diminish those people's beliefs or their experiences at all, because I've seen some stuff over the years that I've been like, okay, yeah, these things happen. But it's a little more rare. Yeah, but you do your best to try to accommodate everybody and ideally, hopefully, educate some people.
Yeah. So you've been staying busy.
Yeah.
I know you've had a lot of cool events recently. That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. As a matter of fact, there's one coming up on Saturday, which sucks because by the time this episode comes out, it'll probably be past.
Hey, that's okay. That's all right.
It's an annual event, isn't it?
So the one this Saturday this is the first time we've done this. The event is called All Hands on Deck, and I'm kind of one of the coordinators. This really wasn't my brainchild. This was thought up by another psychic working within Salt Lake City by the name of Mary Espil. And she had this idea about a year ago, was when we originally decided to try to put this together. And then things came up and it didn't happen. So this year, we're like, okay, we got to do this. So the event, it's a charitable event that we're going to be doing. We're just going to have a small group of psychics working out of a local spiritual center here in Utah. And, just reading for people, using our skills, using our services. We'll have some energetic workers there as well, some healers. I think we've got a couple of massage therapists who will be there on hand as well. So we try to bring just a mix of things to this, at this point, still what would probably be a smaller event. Yeah. But all of the money that we are raising for services for this event is going directly to a local charity. We're working with The Sharing Place, which is an organization here in Salt Lake City that works primarily with children and families who are in the process of overcoming grief or trauma.
See, I think that's the cool aspect there, where you get to host an event and be a part of an event where it has that that drive behind it. I think that's super cool.
Yeah, it's a good thing. We all need to. Money is the energy that we use to make our world work at this point with this incarnation. So we need it. But it is nice to be able to kind of step away from that for just a minute and actually just use our gifts to really benefit. Without the idea of personal gain. It's freeing, it's rewarding on a level. Yeah.
Didn't you recently wasn't there an event as well that was held at the zoo?
That was it was probably about late September. And that is another fundraiser. It's called, I'm blanking on the name now. This is terrible. I've done this 3 years in a row. But they host this big event at the zoo. And I believe that this is where a good chunk of the money that they need each year to just maintain their programs to help take care of the animals. A lot of that money is actually raised through this event. It's kind of elite. They actually shut the zoo down all day to prepare everything. And they ask local companies, from Utah, from Salt Lake City. I think there are even some places from Park City that come down. And they set up bars and they have little restaurants set up, like where, I mean, once you get in, and I don't know how much the tickets are these days, I'm sure they're probably a lot, but once you're in, like you're good, and everything at that point is pretty much free for all the attendees. And then at some point during the night they have raffles, they do different types of activities, different things to try to get people to kind of share a little bit extra in addition to their tickets. Yeah. So it's a good event, and it's an opportunity to kind of step outside of what would be considered like the legit spiritual community, because the people who are coming to this event, usually most of them show up, they don't even know that they're going to have psychics there.
Mm-hmm.
If they see us, they run into us, they're usually a little more hesitant. They don't really have a lot of exposure or experience with something like this. So they're looking at it more, I think, from the perspective of this is fun, this is entertainment.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That's okay. That's a good
thing.
Mean,
you're still connecting with people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I've had some of the most profound readings with people who have sat down just for the sake of,
something new and
like,
different to
yeah,
try.
This is just something fun to try, and then you feel something kind of break in them, like something actually happens, you unlock something in them, and and then it's kind of nice because you make them a believer, and then you also hopefully you've given them something that maybe will send them further along their path in a good way.
Yeah.
So,
that's always fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I always like when you get a chance to talk to somebody who isn't a believer, who isn't in the realm of all of these different things, and has their own tarot card set at home and things like that. Because undoubtedly, I think that it's that cosmic divine intervention where they end up sitting right before you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool.
I think whatever higher power you believe in, I think the right people are usually referred, or right people come to us.
Yeah.
Usually, yeah.
So just briefly before we started, before we hit record, we were talking about how right now, like cosmically, the way that energy is spinning and doing weird shit, it's just a difficult time for people.
Yeah.
What do you think? Because I think that happens, multiple times throughout the year. I think it happens on a pretty regular basis, where whether it's a matter of stuff just getting stirred up and mixed up, but it kind of happens, like I said, periodically, where you'll go through phases, whether it's in your own personal life or the clients that you're seeing. What do you think is that reason, or why does that happen?
I think there are really, well, depending on your belief, there are really so many things that could really kind of be attributed to that. I think, I've friends who are more into the astrological correspondences or meanings to things, and I know that recently, we had, I believe our moon was in Aries, which was making, which was kind of the counterpart of emotion with the moon, and then fire from that Aries sign. So we see people who are struggling with a lot of anger or unresolved, just unresolved stuff, coming up. And Aries is also one of those signs that really kind of makes us have to look at our stuff. So I think maybe you could attribute it to maybe something like that. There are a lot of really other things that I think are going on. Even if you look at like third dimensional stuff right now, our country's insane right now with all the political stuff going on. And I'm getting to the point where I'm I've made up my mind. I know who I'm voting for, but
did you watch the debate last night?
I unfortunately, because of my work schedule, I very rarely do I get to watch them live. But I always go back and watch them after. So, but I've not had a chance to watch this most recent debate. But I understand. It was worth watching. So, yeah. But,
that's why we watch them. Like we didn't watch the first one. I watched last night, and then my wife and I watched the previous one that was earlier together. And it's just so entertaining.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful opportunity to kind of sit back and.
Yeah. I don't know. Entertaining is a good word for it. I don't know. I also, I walk away from some of those sometimes after I've had the chance to sit and watch them. And I have to kind of, what's the word? I have to kind of ground, and I have to kind of remind myself that it's important to be patient with where people are at, particularly when it comes to some of the things coming up over the course of this election, some of the beliefs and things that have been kind of raised, really kind of across the world, people looking at different people's platforms, and some of the people who are turning out and who they are supporting. It's very interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah. Years ago, I worked with a teacher who, in terms of just processes like the ones that we're seeing right now, or maybe people are kind of feeling like, wow, it's just been kind of harder just to make it through the last little while. I worked with this teacher years ago, and her take on things like this was that we are as spiritual as corporeal beings, where there's so much going on with us, just our existence, just even just the day-to-day stuff, but just being, that we are always kind of in a state of flux or evolution. And because of that, we have to kind of go through attunements, we have to kind of get like a tune-up every once in a while. And I think that if we look back, particularly at experiences even within the last few years where we've gone through a rough patch, and it's not just small groups of people, it's like humanity as a whole, like,
Yeah.
there, natural disasters pop up and, weird political stuff going on and, and there's hardships and people who, celebrities that are so loved die, like these kinds of things. And they all seem to kind of hit around the same periods of time. Again, I think that a lot of people out there kind of have a belief that this is another process that we're going through, like another growth spurt or another tune-up, something else that is working us into, I guess, a higher state of vibration or...
It makes sense.
Yeah.
If you think about it, because you can break it down on the personal level where you can see in your own life the struggles and the things that you go through and how you will have periods where it seems like shit just comes one after the other, after the other, after the other.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually you'll get through it and you'll be that much better for that experience.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that on the bigger, grander scheme, as far as society and the world and the planet goes, where, that's kind of what would happen and what is happening, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's hard.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Doing the work. They call it doing the work. Yeah. Doing the work is more often than not going to be a little unpleasant, but you're absolutely right. When you are on the other end of that, you are stronger. You're a little wiser. It's absolutely true.
It's interesting to kind of draw that correlation in regards to like the race right now and how that's going to, in some way, shape, or form, raise us into a higher vibration.
Yeah, I gotta say, when it comes to these kinds of things, so many people are so focused on who actually ends up in that office, which is yes, important because that's really the first step. But I think that if you're looking at kind of things on a bigger scale, kind of the grand scheme of things, which is something that people who are kind of involved with the work that we do, usually that's what we're doing. We have a tendency to kind of think more in like quantum, like the overall, the big picture. One of the things I think that a lot of people can sometimes lose the sight of in the process of, the combativeness, that edge, that competition, like it's my candidate or your candidate, is that it's really kind of what happens beyond that point. That's really what we're working for right now. That's really what people are what they should be invested in. So in terms of, who you decide, who you vote for, and I can't dictate that to anybody. I mean, people need to decide and vote for whoever they need to. But it is a good idea, I think, to remember it's not this person, it's what this person will do with their time. What they're really bringing in terms of their experience and their platform, what it is they really plan to accomplish for us. And historically there has been always one person within that mix of people who are running for that position who has been the one to really move us forward, really kind of help us evolve, move forward in a good way, socially, politically, economically, spiritually as a result of those things, and civilly, also, we've got people who are kind of at the forefront of where we're going, even in a very practical, third dimensional way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to think because, I think that we're always perpetually moving forward. I think that the universe is, the intention is that our vibration is always continually rising, that it's not presenting things into our space, whether on the grand scheme of things or even in our personal space, to lower our vibration. I think it's always with the intention of raising our vibration.
Yeah.
But it's hard to take that into your analytical mind and the processing of, what appears to be reality in a sense and see like, so if this candidate wins, how in the hell is that raising our vibration? How is that not a complete backslide? 15 years that we've lost of all these different civil structures and things like that in society where, so it's hard, but there's got to be rhyme and reason to it.
I'm sure. And again, I think that's one of those concepts or one of those ideas where you really do have to kind of move beyond, kind of the limit of time as we perceive it. I think, again, you really do have to kind of look at the big picture. And even if you look back at, periods where we've gone through, spans of time or periods or eras where there's been, we haven't been as enlightened. We've been kind of in the dark for a while. I think, again, those times, those periods can serve a purpose. It is possible maybe if we end up with somebody who might not be quite so spiritually enlightened or thinking forward in the right ways. There may be a reason for us to have to maybe go through kind of another dark phase, another period of not quite so happy, not quite so positive energy, to be able to see, it kind of reminds us a little bit, these are the things we need to not do if we want to continue to move forward.
I've like in the whole process of the whole, because I don't follow politics super in depth. I'm not really into them for the most part, because I think for the most part it's just all asinine.
So yeah.
But one of the things that I think's been really interesting, with Trump specifically, in regards to the way that he speaks and the things that he talks about and his behaviors and his actions and all of these different things, and how much support he's garnished, or apparent, what appears to be support from America. And I think the realization is, like, I came to this was the epiphany that I had the other day, where it was like, I think the reality is there's still large portions of society, of culture, of the population that see no issue with what he's doing and the way he's behaving and the way that he's speaking and his actions, that they think that that's, par for the course, that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, wow, that's, on one hand, that's kind of sad in a sense, but then everybody's in their own place and time, and we have to respect everybody's journey and blah, 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 blah. But it's like, I think that there's probably a huge amount of people out there that think his actions and behaviors are not just okay, but they're kind of applauding them in a sense, where it's like, it's about time we have somebody stand up and say all of these things. And I'm all for change. I think that the political process, specifically when it comes to the presidential campaign and things like that, is really jacked up. And in the past, I've hated listening to debates because nobody ever answered questions. It's always that political spin that everybody puts on that thing. And I hate that. I'm waiting for that day when the candidate comes up and they get asked a question and they say, well, I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not the all-knowing person, right? I'm educated, I'm smart. When things come up that I'm not familiar with, I'm going to educate myself about that. I'm going to trust upon the people that I have around me to help me in the process, and I'll make educated choices and decisions. But I don't know everything, and they all seem to think that they have an answer for everything. And most of the time, their answers are just bullshit.
No, it's absolutely true. I think that we run into, or have fallen into, a pattern, particularly with our, well, I see this all over the world, but but it's so much closer to home here, obviously, so we're more sensitive to it. But I think that we've run into a situation with our government, our political system here, where we no longer have leaders. We have politicians. And I think if we could get back to a point where we were honoring someone for their skill as a leader, more so, and what they can bring to it in terms of their strength and their vision on that regard, rather than what we get with politicians, which is a lot of the subterfuge and the game playing and the whose pocket are you in, these kinds of things. And I understand, if you're looking at things realistically, to survive in I was going to say industry, and I guess that does apply because there's so much money going back and forth between those political bodies. But if you're going to survive in you're going to dive into that pool and do that work, I think it's understandable you're going to have to play some of those games. So I can't fault some of the leaders that we've had over the last few years, the politicians, presidents that we've had over the last few years, who have they've had trouble getting things done because they've seen opposition time and time again, and they've had to play those games and shake hopefully the right hands, but there are a lot of wrong hands in that mix too. And so I think it's just part of how it works. And, a revamp of our political system would be really, really nice.
Yeah, maybe this is the catalyst. Maybe this is the thing that forces us, whether it's 4 years from now or 8 years from now, into the space where stuff gets completely revamped and changed. That'd be nice.
It would be. Big improvement. Yeah. Well, and you see throughout the world, other countries have done it. They, was it Iceland, within the last 10 years or so, Iceland, really kind of, their citizenry just kind of rose up. They basically overthrew their government because they were tired of the illegal activity, the stuff that was going on. Everybody was so corrupt. and the government at that point had really, much like our own, unfortunately, had gotten to a point where they really were not doing what they could be. They really weren't really fulfilling the role they should be. So, and I remember at the time that was going on, I think it was like the process that they were going through over there had been happening for close to 2 years before we heard anything about it, because I really think there were some bodies within the media that were like, we need to keep this quiet, because if people in the States get an idea that this is something that's possible, oh my gosh, what happens next? So I don't know, but you do see things like that happening around the world, and I hope that we can get there. One of the other things that I always consider when I look at the progress of our country, because I love our country. I love, I'm an American, and I have so many freedoms and so many rights that a lot of other countries unfortunately don't afford their citizens. And so I'm happy with my life here, and I want everybody else to feel the same. But I also have to remember, in terms of some of the struggle, some of the difficulty we experience here within our country, particularly when it comes to social and political issues, that we are still so young as a country. We are still figuring things out. And there are countries around the world that seem to really have it together, but they've got easily like a millennia on us in terms of how long they've actually had organization and structure to their government and their political system and their social, construct. So,
I think people forget that fact that America is a young country.
Yeah, we're still kind of figuring things out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite the journey in the process. It's not what I expected we would talk about, but it works.
Yeah, that's okay. We're just kind of going with what comes here. It's a good thing.
So you talked earlier, you mentioned a little bit about the astrological aspect of stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's one thing I wanted to ask you about. Mm-hmm. How deep do you get into that in your own personal space? Like, how versed are you in a sense?
I have some belief in that. Just because I see common things happening with the people that I work with, even within my personal life. I see common things happening, and I see like the same traits, the same personality types. I see people who are inclined to behave and do the same kinds of things based along astrological correspondence. So I do put some belief in that. I think that my personal take on that, I approach that more from, again, a behavioral or perhaps a psychological perspective, and how those things could potentially be applied on that level. Beyond that, in terms of just the practicals, I'm not an astrologer. I don't sit and do horary or synastry charts. I don't do those things. I've had those done on myself, actually, because it's always a point of interest. But but I think there is a lot there. I think that you really do have to kind of pay attention to something that has been around for so long. I mean, this is a belief, a practice that philosophy, whatever you want to call it, this is something that has been around for thousands of years, and it has moved through every culture in the world. Ancient Asia, the Mayan culture were so into their star charts and their astrological correspondences, and really everywhere you look, there's some component, there is some part of this in some culture. So I think that it's important for us to pay attention to those things. If it's lasted so long, there has to be a grain of truth to this.
Yeah.
So I do believe, but in terms of day-to-day work, I'm not actively doing, the astrology. Yeah.
I had this topic come up in another interview. And the correlation of the moon and the specific energy related to the moon, because so many people feel drawn to it.
Yeah.
So many people feel a connection with it. And some people, dive really deep into that connection and incorporate it in so many different aspects. And some people just like acknowledging the cycles of the moon and cleansing crystals during the full moon and things like that. But I think that there's a deeper meaning behind our connection to the moon. And I'll share my idea, but I want to get your take on it.
Well, I mean, even if you look at physiologically, the moon, it's been established, scientifically, the moon has a physical presence. We feel pull, we feel a connection. The moon influences the tide. There's always been this component, this connection, even the mystical connection to the moon and connections to the divine feminine energy, the goddess. So I think that if you look like way back, like ancient man, the moon was a source of light at the darkest point of the day, and if you look at primitive mind and the way that we thought about things, the psychology behind, something like that, we had these astrological or these astronomical celestial bodies who really were able to kind of step in and take the place of something in terms of the belief that we needed to have, so why not identify that big glowing ball in the sky with some celestial power, our god or our goddess, and I think that, again, it's a very primitive way to think of these things, but because of those things still being so rooted within some area of our brain, I think that we there's already often an appreciation or an understanding or a connection to something like this.
I don't think people realize, and it just barely occurred to me that I don't even know if I've ever necessarily thought about it this way, but I don't think people realize how differently the night sky would have looked 1,000 years ago, because you would have no light pollution, where people would have been able to look up and see everything. That's a really interesting thought, because a lot of times people take it for granted, especially if you live in an urban area in cities and things like that, where you might catch a glimpse of a star or something like that. But it would have looked a way different. Like when you go out camping or something like that, you look up and the sky is just absolutely beautiful. And if you got to see that every single night, like if that was just the norm when you're moving throughout, every single day, where you had that much exposure to what was above, I mean, that kind of makes sense why it plays such an intricate role in, like you were talking earlier about all these different cultures and societies throughout time had some connection and correlation and gave, I guess, weight, for lack of a better term, to some cosmic connection in regards to us here on this planet. But that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the moon in particular, is something that is really closely connected to a lot of spiritual tradition. And you're absolutely right. I mean, our sky would be completely different, was completely different. I mean, if you even, look at what's been done in the last century, as we've developed better understanding around, space astronomy, these kinds of things, as modern science has kind of developed more around that, we've been able to map, we can actually tell that due to shifts or small shifts in our planetary axis, that even stars, constellations actually sit in different positions in the night sky than they did even 1,000 years ago. So,
I wonder how different it would have looked too because of pollution. Like if you think about the way that we've affected the ozone, and do you know what I mean? The air essentially, that it probably looked. It's just interesting. I never even thought about that aspect of how different the night sky would have looked. That's cool. I'm sitting there trying to envision it and picture it.
Yeah. I know one other thing that is interesting before we move to, I think one of the other things that comes into play, and one of the other reasons that things like the celestial bodies place or have importance in our lives, is because they really do, in some sense, allow us to map our lives. They were really kind of the first way that we told time. And time is a complicated thing. There are some people who believe time isn't really a thing, or the people who believe that time is linear or circular, or and how in depth you go into that doesn't really matter. But I think that's one of the other reasons why we find that there is consistency in our relationship to these celestial bodies, is because what they really do allow us to structure our lives in a way. Our society, by and large, we operate on, I believe it would be the Julian calendar, which was shaped more around the sun and the movement of the sun. But prior to that, we were on the Gregorian calendar, which actually was a lunar-based calendar. So again, I mean, even historically, we see a correspondence, a connection there. Like this is how we framed our lives.
See, I think that's interesting. I've often thought that too. Like how different are, what little subtle different changes and maybe massive change would it be if we did have a calendar based around the cycles of the moon as opposed to the cycles of the sun? It's just an interesting thought.
Oh, yeah.
Since we spoke last, and I don't even remember when it was, I think you were like episode 3 or 4 or something of the podcast.
It's been a few months.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Have you had any massive change in regards to your own energy?
I would have to say yes, but not probably not in the way that you would maybe anticipate. Over the course of the summer this year, my life somewhat imploded just a little bit, and it wasn't the spiritual work. Fortunately, none of that was actually the issue. It was just kind of dealing with the day-to-day stuff. This was the year I decided to buy a new house and go through the process of renovating that house, and family issues that arrived as a result of that. And so that was primarily, it had me in a space, I think, where it was harder to focus. I wasn't as grounded, and I was dealing with some pretty negative emotional stuff. There was a lot of stress and anger and anxiety coming up while some of that was going on and not working out so well. But, that was all kind of in the moment. And I was working to make sure that I tried to maintain some level of balance. If you look beyond that, and even actually maybe touching upon that, I will say that this year for me, and this is so weird because I'm thinking back now, and I remember hearing myself say this last year as well, that this year for me actually, and I say for me, but really even in connection or communication I've had with a lot of other people who are other practitioners, clients, people who've come to see me, this year is another one that has been one about getting things done, and done in a sense that we are, again, maybe kind of touching back on some of what we spoke about a moment ago, that we are really ready to kind of move forward in some way, on an energetic level. And we need to divest, we need to shed, we need to remove stuff that doesn't really serve us anymore, so that we can really move forward in a better way. And that's where I've felt energetically easily for the last 6 months or so. It's been this process of like kind of like I'm molting, I'm shedding this old skin, and I'm prepared for whatever is coming next. And again, I've seen that, and I've had that communication with a lot of people that have come to see me for readings and for other work. So because of that, I think energetically we're in this weird place of being prepared to embrace the new in some sense, and being new in some sense, but also still having to acknowledge that we still have this baggage that we're carrying, or this stuff that we're in process, of removing. So, so it's a weird mix, but when you're doing your spiritual work, you're doing that deeper stuff, usually you're more often than not, you're going to be in some kind of a process or some kind of a space like that. There's always work that's happening.
Yeah. I think that, for me personally, I thought 2015 was such a catalytic year of tumultuous change and upheaval, and a lot of times it manifested itself in apparent shitty ways where people felt like this is horrific and horrible and so challenging, and I think the hope was, at least for me personally, I thought, okay, we survived 2015, thank God, and now 2016 is going to be so much easier. Turns out it's really not. It's not as drastic, I guess, as 2015 felt. But I think it speaks to like how small-minded we are in a sense, where we just want something, we can weather a storm as long as it's a weekend, but at least we know that it's, it's like, okay, I got through this small portion of time, but that's okay, because this is, obviously the universe doesn't care how long things take, and we are in that constant state of shift and change. But
our concept of time means nothing to whatever higher power you want to believe, God, Goddess, the universe, whatever you call it, the source, the power, the thing that really kind of keeps this all moving and going, collective consciousness, even whatever you want to consider it. Our ability to discern time, or the way that we monitor time, is really meaningless. If you're looking at the overall scheme of the universe, the expanse, the age of the universe, like a mortal lifetime is nothing. Which is not to diminish our experience in any way. A lot can happen within a year, and most of what happens to us is vital. It's what needs to happen if you look again at the grand scheme of things. But you're right. I think that we're going through a phase right now, just kind of as a being, humanity as a whole. I think where we've had easily several years now, and probably a few more, where we're going to kind of still be doing our work, and it's going to be the harder stuff. Yeah, there's an intensity to things now. I think that we haven't really felt in a long time, and
Does
it's
it feel
not
kind of
just,
more urgent in a sense too?
Yeah, it's like everything has to be done right now,
Mhm.
or even if it isn't something that needs to be done right now, it's like there's this compulsion within us. There's this like I have to do this. Like we're all like I've got to do this, and and it could be the good stuff, it can be the bad stuff, and it can really influence really any aspect of life. But we do see, again, urgency is a good word.
Yeah. Where it feels
Everybody's
like
in
you
such a
can't
rush.
table stuff, where it's
Mhm.
like, well, I've got all this baggage I need to deal with. And in the past, I would have been able to set it aside and move on. And 2 years later, when it comes back up, but it feels like you said, there's an urgency to it where it needs to be dealt with now as opposed to later. And when you do try to table it, it just
that's the other thing, is like you can't really walk away from anything at this point. You get to a point where you do try to, maybe like you say, table something, or realign a plan or an expectation, and more often than not, there's some component of that project that just won't die. It just won't go away, even just for a little while. It's like, no, I'm here. You have to face me now. Yeah.
There's got to be a reason for it. We got to evolve, I guess. We got to get to that higher vibration for the good.
Yeah.
How specific do you think? Because sometimes I think about the importance of how each and every single individual on the planet and the experiences that they're going through vibrationally or energetically or whatever the case may be, plays such an integral, I can't say that word, specific, plays such a specific role on the overall spin of the universe and how everything's interconnected. But how profound do you think it is? Do you think it's minuscule and the combination of all these billion minuscule aspects make up the whole? Or do you think that your individual, so just the things that you experience, the vibration that you put out and hold and keep and kind of transmute in a sense, has massive amounts of repercussion in a positive way, obviously. What do you think?
My answer to that is probably not going to be, it's going to be more of a non-answer maybe. I think that the way that you explain those and the way you look at kind of the idea behind those is that both in a sense are true. I think that, and a lot of it I think comes down to perception again, but you look at, the actions, the path, the life of one person, and, it could be in their view or the view of others, that could be a mediocre experience, but there are other levels of us. There are always other things that are going on. And the tiniest decision that we make today can grow to become something huge tomorrow. And you see historically, even like we've got world leaders, people who did the smallest thing, and it changes the way a country is run. It changes, a political movement. It changes the way society believes about something. So little things equate to big things, I think. And we all I think are, in some way, we all walking an individual path. We all have our own experiences and we all have our own beliefs and karma, whatever you want to call it. We all have these things that we need to do for ourselves and the decisions that we need to make for our individual souls. But then I also believe that kind of the step beyond that is the realization that we are all connected. And that's where I think we see situations maybe where people are struggling spiritually, is because they lose the belief, or they lose the sense of that connection. They get to the point where they're like, I have to do this all by myself. I'm walking this path alone. And we're never really disconnected. We're never really, I think, broken away or separated from that community, that whole.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I kind of got off on a tangent there. Anyway, but in answer to your question, I think it's both. I think that it's the little stuff we do day to day that again can have much more profound meaning, and the realization that the little things that I do will absolutely affect the paths and the decisions and the processes of all those around me.
Because I think now my head's spinning as I'm thinking about it, right? Because there's small little subconscious imperception, things that we can't perceive necessarily, the energetic shifts and changes that happen as we move throughout our life and interact with each other on an individual basis. So everybody that you come into contact with in some way, shape, or form, you're exchanging energy with them. And then there's physical things that we can actually, see, feel, and touch, where if I choose to leave my house 5 minutes earlier than I did, then I got into a traffic accident or something like that. But all of those repercussions, so if I get into an accident, it affects that person and that individual, which then could have compounding ripple effects to eventually affect somebody in China, right? It's hard to see it on that big grand scheme, but you can little tiny pieces of it affects this person, then that person, and then that person, and then that person, and so on and so forth, until somebody in China for some reason has some experience specifically related to the beginning point of me choosing to leave my house 5 minutes earlier or not.
Yeah. That's a good way to look at that, to put that in terms of like a more practical kind of thing. And it's true. There's a lot of truth to that. And, and it's another way of looking at things that really in some sense does validate that we are all connected in seemingly, in unfathomable ways. We just never know.
One of the things I was going to ask you too, because I forgot, you've floated now, so you've floated a couple of times. So tell me what you thought about it.
I really enjoyed the floating experience. I floated several years ago. I was on a vacation to California, and at that point, I think, oh God, this was long enough ago. I think California was probably like the only place people were doing this. Well, I was going to say recreationally, but it's not really, it's not really recreation. I guess maybe you could use it for that. But at that point it was more of the, like the spa kind of experience, and it is now, but I think that, it's been, over the years since that experience that it actually, like, people have started to realize, like, there's a therapeutic component to this. Like, this is actually helping people. But years ago, I went and I had an experience, and it was really good. I enjoyed it, and for me, it was, again, I likened it, or it was very akin to some initiation processes that I had gone through when I was much younger, and I was working with a medicine worker, a native medicine worker, and it was unusual because I didn't anticipate that it would do this, but it put me right back in that same headspace. So it was good. It was a way to kind of revisit an experience that had been several years in the past. So I definitely enjoy it. I've floated at the place here in Tooele now a couple of times, and again, I have that same experience. It just allows me the ability to just kind of take myself out of the day-to-day routine. I really liken it to like a really kind of a pretty intense meditative state, and I've recommended that, I tell people, particularly people I'm working with who are trying to learn processes of meditation or ways to be more mindful. I tell people all the time, like, not everybody is wired in the right way to be able to assume lotus position for several hours each day and attain one mind, and so you have to find what works for you, and there are other things that people can do that allow them to get to that point or reach that space, and I would say floating is definitely a good way to do that.
Have you had any noticeable physical benefits from it, like because now that you've done it a couple of times, and things like that? Did you notice any change physically where, you weren't as stiff and sore, you slept better or stuff like that?
Yeah. The day of, like, after the float session, I feel, this is going to seem like more, again, a little more, maybe metaphysical or esoteric in the way I explain this maybe, but I feel, almost like a sense of lightness in my body. It's like gravity doesn't hit as hard. I don't feel so heavy, and as a result of that, I do feel like areas in my body where maybe I'm more inclined to have like small chronic pain or something along those lines. I do feel that is better. It doesn't hurt so much, or just in general, I'm just relaxed. Like, my muscles feel looser. I'm not so tense physically, and it de-stresses, you feel better. I think your mind is more clear, and as a result, I go home those nights after a float session and I do sleep better. My mind is quieter. I can actually like lay down and go to sleep. I don't have that running dialogue for those few minutes after your head hits the pillow, where you're reviewing the day and worried about tomorrow, and I forgot to do this thing, or that's quieter. It's easier.
It's a cool experience, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. And I think that, with prolonged treatment, like prolonged going and floating again and again and again, I've talked to a few people who've had the experience to do that, and I've seen it do really good things for people who are dealing with, PTSD, because it gives them another tool that they can use to maintain control.
Yeah.
I've
got this crazy thing now that you just, you mentioned PTSD, so I want to talk to you about it and get your opinion on it. several episodes ago, I don't remember how long ago, but we talked to Rick Doblin, who is the founder of MAPS. It's this organization that they focus on clinical studies and things like that in regards to psychedelics and treatment of mental illnesses.
Okay.
One of the ones that they do mainly right now, they're working on getting MDMA approved through the FDA and through the government and everything like that in order to treat PTSD. And so I was talking to him. I've never taken MDMA, so I have no conceptual idea of what you experience or go through, but I've heard a lot about it. I've read a lot about it and things like that. And the way that he described, so they'll treat people with PTSD specifically. And what they found was because they'll have them take MDMA, which then essentially takes their mind. And this is obviously my take on it, right? This is, takes their mind and their brain to a place where they can not necessarily relive the traumatic experience, but they can go through the traumatic experience in conjunction with like a psychotherapist or something like that.
Yeah.
And they don't have, basically it calms them enough to where they can go back through it without having so much emotional reaction to something that, whether it was a soldier or somebody that suffered some trauma and abuse or whatever. But as I was talking with him and he's describing it, I'm sitting there thinking about how, let's see if I can adjust my chair here to get comfortable. Essentially, I felt like a lot of times that's what we do in the space of energy work, because you're working with a client and trauma comes up, old stuff comes up, and they can move through it and process it and gain insight from it and make peace with it to some extent. And it's because of, I think it's because of the place that their mind goes, whether we think of it like in a theta brain state or something like that, to where they're more at peace and more calm and they can see it from the outside to a certain extent, and they're not necessarily reliving that traumatic experience. Yeah. Would you agree? Like, think about the times that you've worked with people where really shitty stuff's come up.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's been my experience, at least, a lot of the work that I do is shamanic work, and I one of the processes that I utilize a lot with clients is we actually go through a journey process. Things like, like this work they're doing where they're using MDMA to work with people who are overcoming trauma, trying to work through that. And is really, that's just one facet or one aspect of what this would be, but all of this would really kind of fall under the blanket of shadow work. People hear the term shadow work and there's a lot of confusion about what that is. But in essence, what you're doing is you are making the conscious decision to put yourself in a place where you are reliving or you are experiencing the dark stuff, the bad stuff, with the idea that you will integrate this, that you will incorporate this into the overall being, and then be able to move beyond it and be made stronger for it. So I'm a big believer in that stuff, and over the years I've read other things about particularly the use of MDMA in like research for people who are overcoming trauma, these kinds of things. So I think that there's definitely a resource there. It's a good thing.
I just thought it was so fascinating, and he did obviously a much better job of kind of describing the chemical reaction and the process that the brain goes through in response to the MDMA and all those kind of things. But essentially, it takes their brain to a certain place where then they are able to process that trauma. Yeah. And I was just sitting there thinking as I was talking with him, I'm like, dude, like when we work in energy and in that space, you're accomplishing the same thing to a certain extent. Oh, yeah. I just thought it was fascinating to think that
I think it really is. It's something that I think they kind of go hand in hand. It is really very kind of it is the same thing. I mean, if you look at it, it's just a different approach. And really, if you're looking at the use of MDMA, I mean, that really is nothing beyond, for, I don't know how many centuries, millennia or whatever, we've had cultures who have used ayahuasca or peyote. There are throughout the world, there are lots of other cultures who have used something along these lines, some sort of plant medicine, to facilitate this kind of a process as well. And so it's a good thing. And I think that, the work that we do, we're working with someone, obviously, because of the society that we live in and some of the legal ramifications that would arise, we're not all able to just, give a client MDMA or go through an ayahuasca ceremony,
Yeah.
and that's fine, but we use processes where, we are able to get someone, I think, into a similar state of being, a similar state of mind or emotion, where they can, again, have a similar experience. They're able to confront or live through or face something that has been a hindrance, something that has been a negative experience, something that has caused problems for them on probably lots of different levels. And I think that, you can reach states of mind like that. You can do those processes without the need for things like MDMA and the ayahuasca and the peyote and these kinds of things. But I will say that one of the things that I have noticed, and one of the reasons why there are people who find such great reward with something like that, is because that is it's one extra component. It's one extra thing that you can add to a process like that really does allow them to really focus on something. Often when we're dealing with people who are going through work or trying to do work like this, it really is the ability to kind of take their mind out of the day-to-day, to really just kind of shut down the conscious component of who they are long enough to really get back to a point to revisit that, to do that work. So I think that, things again like MDMA, they allow the brain, for just a short time to kind of like rewire, like it moves into a different phase of consciousness or a different part of the brain that is really active at that point, that allows them to do that.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It was super interesting to talk to, and the things that they're doing. And I mean, it's only a matter of time, I think, in the long run. I think same thing with like the legalization of weed. I think that's only a matter of time until it's across the board.
Yeah, it needs to happen. It's unfortunate. There's this part of me that is, and I have, maybe touching back upon our discussion earlier, I am very political. I follow this stuff. I read the paper every day. I get online. I know the issues. I deal with this stuff. But so there's this component of me that looks at things like the regulation of something like that as like this is a social justice issue. This is somebody else who has put themselves in a position to dictate what is right for you. And obviously there are times where that is appropriate, but this is not one of those times. And there are potentially there's so much good that can come from something like that. I mean, even within my own life, I've got people I know who are dealing with illnesses, pain, who could really see some relief or some benefit from something like that.
Yeah.
So I think that it's good. We're seeing more and more of that happening, and I mean, each year, like another state legalizes, the next year, another state legalizes. And I mean, soon enough, we're going to have to recognize this on a federal level, and it'll become just something that is also available, for whatever use, I'm not saying you have to use it medicinally, but, for whatever purpose, yeah.
I think it'll be a good day. I think when you go back and like research and do any sort of like uncovering of kind of the path that marijuana specifically has taken in regards to our society and our culture, and back in the day, because I think it was like in the 30s or 40s when it was actually criminalized, and it was just really fascinating to kind of learn about the journey that it's taken, and like and then in the 60s and 70s when they moved it to a Schedule 1 drug in regards to all those different things. And man, it's interesting.
It's very interesting. And and you look back on some of the history there, and you have to wonder, okay, whose agenda were we really serving with some of this stuff? Because these decisions weren't logical.
Yeah,
they weren't. They made no sense.
And I think that's what it always was. Is it had some sort of political connection and correlation with somebody's agenda at the time period. Yeah. And I mean, you could probably say that in regard to a lot of different things that we currently have in place already.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Do you know what I mean? Where at the time period it was some political agenda or party that was organizing and trying to get this in place, and now we're stuck with it 50, 60, 70 years later. It's asinine.
Yeah.
So you're for legalization?
I'm definitely for legalization.
Yeah.
And I'm not to be honest, I'm not even really a user. Like I think, I mean, I've used, but it's been a long time, several years at least. I don't see why not. I just don't see why this continues to be something that we need to regulate and control. I mean, even statistically, you look at research that's been done. I mean, it's overall, it's less harmful. It truthfully, it's less likely to be an addictive. People are much more likely to cause trouble under the influence of alcohol, and that's readily available everywhere. So I mean, it's time, and there again is just so much benefit that we could see as a result of legalization.
See, I'm thinking about that too, because I would definitely not classify myself as a user. I don't even remember the last time I smoked weed.
Yeah,
it's been a really, really long time. And so suddenly, if it was legalized, I don't think that much would change.
Probably not. I mean, if you're using, if it's a part of your life and you're already doing it now, even if it's illegal.
Exactly.
And I've got friends who, they do, they're smokers regularly, some of them, and it's everywhere. If you really want to get your hands on it, you can.
Yeah, it's not hard.
And then you look at other benefits too. I mean, you look at like Colorado specifically, and how vastly this has improved their economy. I mean, their state economy is, who wouldn't want to make a decision like this? At this point, I think, it really is just a few people who just can't get over their own hangups, their own judgment on this, and they unfortunately are in a position to dictate those rules to the rest of us. So
I used to have this discussion with friends of mine, because I'm for the legal. Well, when I say I'm for, I know it's a completely asinine concept at this point in time where our culture is, but I think the full legalization of every drug. I think that legalizing any of those drugs, regardless of whether it's weed or heroin or meth, or I think across the board, I think it's kind of asinine. That's my take, my personal take. But I used to have discussions and arguments with people because in their mind, suddenly if everything was legalized, then everybody would just go nuts.
Yeah.
Everybody would just go apeshit and get high, and we'd have everybody running around on meth. And I'm like, yeah, the reality is you wouldn't see that because I think, like you said, the people that are using right now are still going to use, and the people who aren't might experiment in some way, shape, or form, but it's not like they're going to suddenly go off the deep end just because it's legalized. You're not going to have heroin addicts popping up everywhere suddenly because it's legalized. And then we do away with all the negative aspects that come from criminalization of these substances.
There has been nothing more expensive, I think, for our country, particularly in the last 50 years or so. There's been one of the most expensive initiatives, one of the most, not only, I mean, when I say expense, we're not even just talking money, we're also talking in terms of human life, has been the war on drugs, which is ridiculous. And I think a lot of it comes down to education. And on a psychological level, if you look at the way humans are wired, you make something secret and you tell us we can't have it, we want it even more. And so I think you're right. I think if we could get to a point where we had maybe rules or guidelines for how maybe these things were obtainable, but not necessarily have them be made illegal, or and also work to remove some of the stigma around potentially using or accessing things like this, I think it would definitely be a good thing. Across the board, I mean, you even look at other things, you look at countries throughout Europe where prostitution has been legalized, and that's kind of a complicated issue, and I can't say I'm necessarily for, I'm not like pro prostitution. I can't say that, but
it's not your platform. You're running on.
No. But you look at areas where they've said, like, what, this is something that is happening whether we like it or not. So we can step in and we can try to maybe help regulate. We can make sure that these sex workers have access to things they need to stay healthy, that they go and they get regular blood tests to make sure that they're healthy, that they have places that they go where they can do this that are safe so that they are not as inclined to be victimized or attacked. And like I said, in an ideal world, we wouldn't need to have an industry like that, but there's not necessarily anything wrong with the fact that we do.
That industry's been around since the beginning of time.
One of the oldest, I mean, and even I've got a few people I know who are more on the fundamentalist Christian mindset or in that spectrum, and and even then I have to kind of remind them, like, hey, you read your Bible, we're going to go right back to Mary Magdalene. So I don't know. Again, I think a lot of it is just judgment and stigma and fear around some of these things that are, off limits or bad for us, and they don't need to be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in the end, the idealistic society, I think, is one where everybody's free from judgment of one another, and we aren't looking to impose our collective conscious mindset of what is right and wrong on individual people outside of the exception of once you cross over that boundary of affecting and influencing somebody specifically. Yeah. So in the comfort of your own home, in the lifestyle of two consenting adults, whatever the case may be, to each their own. You know, that's my point of view and perspective.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
That's a huge, massive change that who knows if
it
that'll
is.
ever come.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, that might take us another couple hundred years or so, right? Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. We make progress. I noticed, like with time, you know, when it comes to these kinds of issues, like these social issues, you know, these kinds of things. I noticed that, and maybe that would be one of these things, you know, maybe to touch upon some of what we were talking about earlier, where we all kind of feel this sense of urgency now. I've noticed, like, if you look at every facet, every aspect of our society, whether it's our technology, whether it's our communication, whether it's our politics, whatever it is, the things that really like the basics, the fundamentals, how we run our society. Everything is happening so much faster now, you know, like you know, we have technology and science now that like even over the last 10 years, like things have like, it's almost like things are doubling in their speed. Things are happening more. There's more available. There's, you know, and you see that happening, I think, with other things too, you know. I mean, I can think even like 10 years ago, you wouldn't have seen the level of actual like politicians, political discourse on things like we're going to legalize marijuana. You know, I mean, so things are happening faster and faster as we move forward, I think. So who knows, you know, if we continue on that vein, maybe we'll all be free to do what we want to do within the next century, right? Yeah. That
could be the underlying reason why we have that sense of urgency or or some aspect of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you too, because it's so hard for me to remember all the damn things that I talk about with people on this damn podcast.
I mean, you know, you've got everybody in here, and everybody that I'm sure that you've had on here, at least, you know, the podcast, all the ones I've listened to, you know, everybody's. It's odd because I listen to some of what's talked about with some of your guests, and I think we're all so different, but we're also the same. Yeah. You know, it's kind of what I walk away from every time I end up one of your podcasts. And so. But yeah, I'm sure like over the course of all the different personalities, like so much comes up and there's so much that's discussed. Yeah. Yeah.
But I was going to ask you, because I don't remember if we talked about it way back in the day or not. And in the end, it doesn't matter what the hell we talked about on the last episode. This is a new episode. But did you watch Stranger Things on Netflix?
That is, you know, I've had so many people talking about that, and it's unusual because it's like it's really blown up, like it's huge now. Everybody's like, have you watched Stranger Things? Yeah. And I don't know, maybe this was one of those situations, a rare moment where I actually was kind of right on top of something right when it hit, because I think the series actually came out like. It's been a few months ago, like when it really kind of hit. And I remember at the time I was flipping through Netflix. I do the Netflix thing. I was flipping through Netflix, and what caught me was Winona Ryder's name, and I was like, "Yay, someone's getting her work again!" you know, because I know she's had trouble over the years, but she's she's always been a decent little actress, and so. Anyway, so I was like, "Oh, Winona Ryder, I got to check this out," you know. And then I started to read, like, you know, like the kind of the context, the story, you know, like the write-up of what it was, and I was like, this sounds really interesting, you know. And I loved that genre. I loved that not only the sci-fi thriller horror genre, but I also like that particular era.
Yes,
too.
Wasn't that the greatest thing?
Yeah, like I watched that. I watched the whole series within like I think a couple of days, because I just had a couple of days where I had the time, you know. And once you started it was like, I got to see what happens next, and so. But I remember watching those, and it just really threw me back to those old school Stephen King movies from the 80s, you know. And they captured that vibe so well.
Like with everything, even the music and the cinematography and the way that it was shot and all these different aspects, it so harkened back to that time period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that time period. You know, I think it kind of started a little bit of it kind of kicked off kind of a revisiting of those for me. Because I mean, shortly within a couple weeks after watching that series, I got out. I watched It again, and some of those old, you know, those 80s. You know, those movies that were based off his books, you know, because he was kind of the penultimate writer around that era, that genre for this kind of stuff. So, but it was good. I like it. It was good. I'm looking forward to season 2.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah.
I was thinking this too, not just in regards to Stranger Things, but on the bigger scale of like when it comes to movies and cinema and TV and things like that. So many times we'll watch something, and I think if I remember right, we talked about Sense8, that other series, the Wachowskis, that's on Netflix. Did we talk about that?
We did talk about
briefly.
That one. Yeah, just briefly. Yeah.
But the way that what we could easily describe as energy work, a connection to the higher source of energy, is displayed and portrayed in TV and film and everything like that. And it's glorified in a sense, but at the same time, I don't think so. And this is crazy to we're nerds at this point sitting here talking about
that's okay. Let's embrace it.
But with Stranger Things, and her name was 11, wasn't it? Yeah. And so the way that she worked with stuff and the way that she did things and the way that she connected, right? And you have her being this like research science project essentially that they were using her for.
Yeah.
But it's like this natural empathic girl that is then, forced into this situation. And it was just because I'm sitting there watching it, appreciating it for all of these different aspects, but then at the same time thinking, God, that's so cool to think that. I just find it fascinating how people, do you know what I mean, portray, because it would be really easy to describe some of the things that we experience, whether it's in regards to working with people or through meditation or some other thing. Like when we travel to another dimension, it's really easy to describe that as something that they portray on film that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've had situations over the years, particularly if I've been working with someone who, I've been trying to teach someone something, and people will come to us and they will have questions about things they're curious about that really kind of even move beyond the boundary of what we're really supposed to be doing during that visit. And there's been more than one occasion where I have struggled to explain a personal experience that I've had with someone else, and or to someone else, and that's one of the things that has saved me a couple of times. I've actually been able to say, well, have you ever seen this movie? Do you remember in this scene when this was, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's what this is. That was my experience, and I think it's kind of cool if you look at kind of the idea of collective consciousness. I think that there are people in Hollywood, screenwriters, whoever, there are people within that industry who write and create these things. And I think that so much of what they're putting into their work is something that they are tapping into from that collective consciousness, which is really the accumulation of legitimate experiences like this that people within like our industry are having, So it's a good thing. It's a good medium to in a sense kind of give people like a visual and explanation, like this is what this would be, or this would be kind of like what this is, or how this would feel. That's one of the areas where Hollywood I think helps us in a sense, because they do a lot of other stuff, particularly around our community, that's not quite so nice.
It's a good series. I loved it. Like you said, I'm looking forward to the next one. Well, Michael, I can't thank you enough, man.
So thank you.
It's been super wonderful.
I have a good time. It's nice again just to kind of talk with you. I love what you're doing here with the podcast, and anytime you want me back, let me know. Excellent.
Give everybody your contact information again, the best way to find you.
So I'm Michael J. Ingleby. I'm a professional psychic working within Salt Lake City, Utah. You can always just pick up the phone and give me a call or text me, 801-864-7870. Or you can reach me via email at mandalameta.arts@gmail.com.
That's also your website too, right?
So there'll be a link through the website through that as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, man.
So thanks for having me.
Yep. Everybody go out and have a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful, wonderful day, and go watch Stranger Things if you haven't yet.
The tiniest decision that we make today can grow to become something huge tomorrow. Kind of like I'm molting, I'm shedding this old skin, and I'm prepared for whatever is coming next. We're going through a phase right now, just kind of as a being, humanity as a whole, I think, where we've had easily several years now, and probably a few more, where we're going to kind of still be doing our work, and it's going to be the harder stuff.